well played getting up after the time I saw you leave a party last night. Sir Desmond Swayne, Conservative MP for New Forest. Good morning to you.
Good morning, good morning.
Thank you very much for joining me. The Conservative Party conference is, given where we are in the polls with the Conservative Party, should be a very buoyant affair. But while Boris Johnson remains high in the polls, and Rishi Sunak is Chancellor and many others, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss very popular as well, an awful lot of people are confused at why that is the case, given the amount of chaos we've got. Shortages of fuel, shortages of food on the shelves, shortages of staff, an extraordinary perfect storm there, and yet Tories seem to be doing just fine. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's inevitably there's always a judgment between various alternatives, and I don't think that the opposition parties have come up with a better offer.
So you're not very good, but the other party's worse.
Invariably, that's part of ordinary political life. I think also you've got a Prime Minister who is extraordinary in his ability to hold on to public esteem. I mean, I've been something of an opposition myself over the last 18 months. It's been a pretty lonely business. Boris is popular. And I think that whilst, these problems do exist, they are real. Yeah. Nevertheless, people do, I think people do not appreciate them being exaggerated in the way that often they are. And I think
the media? Certainly with the fuel shortages, the media was accused of, well, if you talk about it, you say there's a problem, then people go and panic and then you create the problem.
But I passed in Bournemouth just the other day a great long queue outside a petrol station, and a mile further on, the pumps were all open, available, and there was no queue at all. It is patchy.
OK, yes. I mean, certainly we know that across large swathes of the country, that issue has been resolved. Having the army being brought in to drive some of these tankers, is that just PR, or is that going to actually make a dent in the actual problem, certainly that still exists in London and the South East, we're told, by the Petrol Retailers Association?
Well, it's the right thing to do because it will reassure. And remember, this is a problem about reassurance rather than a shortage of fuel. Yeah. It's people rushing to fill up their tanks. If the impression is given that bringing the army in to support deliveries reduces the demand for people to fill their car all the time and to fill cans in the boot, then that achieves its objective. Okay. But ultimately, in any free market, the only way to deal with a shortage, and the shortage is HGV drivers, is for the price to rise. In other words, the wages. And the problem has been for over a decade, the hourly rate for an HGV driver has halved, largely because we've had lots of foreign drivers who would work for less. Hence the problem that we now have.
So do you support the Prime Minister when he basically is arguing, look, we've got a problem. We've been addicted to cheap labour. Part of the point of Brexit was that we wouldn't have this flood of cheap labour from abroad. And we need to have a high wages, high skill economy. And the haulage companies, well, they've created this problem themselves, the distribution companies, the supermarkets. If you had been paying decent wages, you'd have kept these people, and it's your problem and you need to fix it. And then, of course, suddenly then saying, actually, we'll have another 5,000 plus visas for drivers for the short term. But do you think that largely that there is a strategy? Because we spoke to earlier a guest who's from the wholesale retail Federation of Wholesale Distributors, saying he doesn't believe there is a strategy at all.
Well, the proper strategy is to let the market work. And it is working. Just look at the golden hellos that are now being offered to HGV drivers.
Except it's HGV drivers moving from company to company, as opposed to new HGV drivers getting it who can't, because, of course, the DVLA and the DVLS are not actually processing applications.
So there are a number of problems in there. But certainly the basic solution to the problem must be making it more attractive to be an HGV driver. And one, that's pay, but there are all sorts of other terms and conditions in there. Not least the provision of safe areas to prevent you being attacked and your goods being nicked while you're asleep in some lay-by.
Yeah. The other issue, of course, is shortages of food. And other items on the supermarket shelves. Now, some of this is international, there's no question at all, and this is happening in Brussels. And last time I looked, Brussels had not left the European Union. It can't be down to Brexit. And so everyone else is experiencing this as well. However, Can you imagine, sir? I mean, last year we were in a situation where people were being told a few days before Christmas, large parts of the country, you cannot see family members from another household. Christmas was effectively cancelled, despite, and you and I both campaigned against the lockdown in November, which supposedly was to save Christmas. And of course, we cancelled Christmas to save January, and then we cancelled January, etc., etc., etc. But could you imagine even then that a year on, we would be in a situation where the Prime Minister is trying to, once again, save Christmas, to allow people to actually be able to buy a turkey and have their pigs in blankets on Christmas Day? I mean, we are lurching from crisis to crisis, such as not being able to buy pigs in blankets is a crisis. But we are used to, in the Western world, being able to buy what we want to buy when we want to buy it. Given that the Conservative government has been in charge all this time, is this a crisis that could have been averted? Is this a crisis that should have been averted?
Well, it comes down to exactly the same problem as we were talking about earlier. It's not that there's a shortage of food. There's a shortage of key labour. Certainly the empty shelves is down to the HGV drivers again. Clearly, pigs in blankets is abattoir workers. But again, the only way you will persuade more people to become workers in abattoirs is to allow the market to work and the wages in those professions and occupations to rise accordingly. There's always this belief that there's a lever that governments can pull, to make things better and to mend them. Actually, I've always taken the rather quaint view that governments don't do things particularly well, and therefore the less we expect them to do, the better, and to allow free markets and enterprises to work to deliver and solve our problems. I know it's a long-term strategy, but you began by asking for a strategy.
I'd love to see a strategy. What about the issues in terms of what taxes? That's a very big area of debate among Tory party delegates this week. Conservatives are supposed to be the party of small government, low taxes. Well, that certainly isn't the case anymore. It's hard now to decipher the difference between any Labour policy and any Conservative policy, or indeed their plans for taxes. We're told that Rishi Sunak is promising to double down on help for the jobs market. We had the end of furlough at the beginning of this month. He's going to commit £500 million to renew job support programmes, helping people get back into work. But obviously, I think for a lot of people, the end of the furlough scheme is to be welcomed as a signal, right, we're getting back to normal, and hopefully a signal that there won't be more lockdowns. I mean, that's certainly how and I hope you read into it. But we're looking at council tax rises come next April to pay for social care. We're looking at that national insurance hike. We're told to pay for social care. In fact, it's not a penny of it's going to social care for the first 3 years, then the NHS. We are looking at a budget and spending review coming up in coming months where there are huge bills to be paid. Is the Conservative Party still the party of low tax?
Well, I'm a fiscal conservative. I believe that if you're going to spend money, you have to pay for it. And yes, I believe it's much better that we spend our own money. We do it much more effectively than allow the government to spend it for us. But there is a huge demand out there to fix social care, and the belief is, I think it's a mistaken belief, but nevertheless the belief is, it's overwhelmingly the national view, that this is another area of national life we want to nationalise, and the government must fix it, and the government's going to pay for it, and that is very popular. Well, the government can only pay for it by taking the money out of your pocket. Now, if it comes to a choice between lower taxes and fiscal responsibility, paying for what we're spending, I'm afraid I'm with the paying for what we're spending. In the longer term, certainly I believe that cutting taxes generates more wealth, generates more enterprise, and in the end will lead to a faster rate of growth and lower taxes, and that virtuous circle. But in the short term, I think it's an illusion to believe, as some of my colleagues do, that somehow you'll cut taxes and revenue goes up. Just like that. It doesn't. Can
I ask you also about vaccine passports? They were threatened to be coming in by now. They've not been brought in England. They have been brought in Scotland, although they're not enforcing it because basically they can't enforce it at the current time. Apps not working, etc., etc. We have seen, though, vaccine passports being brought in places like Italy, in Australia, where people are basically told, if you don't have the jab, you can't work. We've got 5 England footballers, a huge number of actually Premiership players who have not been jabbed, refused to get jabbed for their own reasons, and who could possibly be banned from, therefore, playing in the World Cup in Qatar next year. Do you think it's likely that this government will actually bring in vaccine passports, or do you think that now is off the cards, even though there is a consultation that's going out right now?
Yeah, well, certainly the fact that it's been put off is at least some encouragement. You know,
I mean, it wasn't required to attend this conference, was it?
No, exactly. And there was a suggestion that it once would. I received an invitation to number 10 just a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, which required me to show my vaccination status at the door. When I made it absolutely plain that I would forgo the privilege of coming, that was changed. I just believe that we are a free country. People should be allowed to go about their lawful business without being required to produce medical information. And whilst I'm the greatest advocate of vaccination, would encourage anyone to get vaccinated, I don't believe that it's right to compel people to do so or to punish them by denying them certain civil rights if they don't do so.
Okay, really good to talk to you, Sir Desmond Swayne, because